I want to be honest about the pay before I say anything else, because it's the part people always get stuck on. 220 a day, cash, for boundary work that ought to have paid 140. I was 26 years old and I'd been laid off from a mine job in Letcher County 11 months earlier. And when a man named Dale Prater called me at my mother's house in October of 2011 and offered me $220 a day to run flagging line on a track past Hollow Creek, I did not ask a single question. That is the whole of my defense. I didn't ask why the last fellow quit. I didn't ask why a company that pinched pennies on chainsaw bar oil was throwing money at a job any kid with a compass could do. I took it and I was grateful. And I told my mother I'd have her furnace fixed before Thanksgiving. The track sat up in the northeast corner of a holding the outfit had bought off an estate. About 1,100 acres of mixed hardwood that hadn't been cut since maybe the 40s. There was no road in. There was a gravel spur that ran up along the creek for about 2.5 miles, and then just stopped in a turnaround where somebody had dumped a washing machine sometime in the Reagan administration, and past that you walked. My truck sat at that turnaround every day from 7 in the morning until dark, and every day I walked in with a compass, 100-foot tape, a bag of orange surveyor's flagging, a can of blue marking paint, and a sandwich. The first morning was beautiful. I want to be clear about that because of how it all turned. That country in October is about as pretty as anything God ever made. The poplars going old, the sourwood already gone red. I fogged sitting down in the draws until 9 or 10 in the morning, and then lifting all at once like a curtain. You could hear the creek the whole time. Squirrels working the hickories. I ate lunch on a rock ledge looking down into a hollow so quiet I could hear leaves hitting other leaves on the way down. I remember thinking I'd been paid worse to feel a lot worse. I hung about 400 feet of tape that first day along the eastern boundary, tying ribbon on saplings every 30 or 40 feet where the line ran, blazing bigger trees with paint where the corners turned. Good, clean, visible work. When I came back the next morning to pick up where I'd left off, the last 200 feet of it was gone. Now tape comes down. That's a normal thing. Wind gets it, deer rub it off, a limb falls. But when tape comes down natural, you find it. You find a strip of orange plastic hung up in the brush, 40 feet downhill, faded and dirty, or you find the end still knotted around the sapling with the middle torn out ragged. That's what it looks like. What I found was that every single ribbon had been cut, not torn, cut straight across with something sharp enough to leave a clean edge in plastic. And every one of them had been taken off the tree. I wound into a tight little coil about the size of a biscuit and set at the base of the trunk it had come from. 12 of them. 12 neat orange coils sitting in the leaf litter, spaced 30 and 40 feet apart. Running back down my line like markers of a different kind. I stood there a long time. I remember I laughed, once out loud, the way you do when your brain is trying to make a thing be funny so it doesn't have to be anything else. Then I picked them all up, put them in my bag, and rehung the whole 200 feet. I called Dale that evening from the gas station in Cumberland because there was no signal anywhere near that turnaround. I told him somebody was pulling my tape. He said, "Kids." I said, "Dale, there's not a road within 4 miles of that line." He was quiet for about a second and a half, and then he said, "Well, hang it again." And then he said, "You're getting paid whether the tape stays up or not." And I understood that the conversation was finished. The second morning it was gone again. Farther in this time, a good 600 feet of it. Everything I'd hung the previous afternoon, all of it cut and coiled and set at the foot of the trees. And at the very end of the line, where I'd stopped work at dusk, whoever it was had gone ahead of me. There was a ribbon tied to a beach about 40 feet past my last flag, out in unmarked timber, orange. My tape, tied in a knot I don't tie. I want to say I felt fear at that point. I didn't quite. What I felt was something more like embarrassment, and under it a kind of low irritation, the way you feel when a stranger touches something of yours in a store. It hadn't gotten into the part of my brain that keeps you alive yet. It was still in my mind a person, a weird person, a hermit, some old boy who didn't like company on his ridge. Kentucky is full of men who move back in the hills to be left alone. And every one of them will run you off with a rifle before he'll say good morning. And I'd have understood that. I'd have respected it. But a man who runs you off doesn't coil your tape up neat and set it down like he's putting away your toys. That was the third day, and the third day was when I found the tracks. The line crossed Hollow Creek twice. And both crossings had wide gravel bars with a strip of soft gray mud between the gravel and the water. Perfect for tracks. I'd been reading deer sign in that mud all week without thinking about it. And that morning, I laid over top of my own boot prints from the day before. There were bare human feet. I've hunted my whole life. I know what a man's foot looks like out of a shoe. These were that, but wrong in a way that took me some minutes to put words to, squatting there over them with the creek going by. They were wide. Not long, no bigger than my own. Maybe a size 10, but splayed out across the ball of the foot like a fan. The toes spread apart with gaps between them. No crowding, no bunion, nothing shoes had ever pushed together, and there was hardly any arch to them. Just a broad, flat impression, deep at the ball and the heel, and barely lifted in between, and the outer edge of the print pressed so shallow it was nearly not there, like the skin along that side was hard as a hoof. There were 2 sets, maybe 3. A couple of the prints were smaller, and I couldn't tell if that was a different person or the same one stepping short. They came out of the water, crossed the bar, and went up into the timber exactly where my line went. Not near it, on it. And when I walked my line that morning, I found them again in every soft place. In the black dirt of a wet weather seep, in the mud of a hog wallow, in the leaf mold where a tree had blown over and left bare ground. Always in my footprints. Not beside them. Inside them, toes pressed into the mud where my boot heel had been, like somebody had walked my whole day's work behind me. One careful step at a time, putting their feet where mine had gone. I did not leave. I've thought about that 10,000 times since. I've thought about the money in my mother's furnace and the 11 months of unemployment, and about being 26 and thinking of yourself as a certain kind of man, and none of those explanations feel true when I try them on now. I think the truth is I couldn't make it real. It sat right there in front of me in gray mud, and I could not make my mind hold it. So I hung tape all day and told myself I'd think about it that night. And that night, I drank 2 beers in my truck at the turnaround and did not think about it at all. The 4th day, I started talking to myself. That was deliberate. The woods had gotten quiet in a way I couldn't stand. No squirrels. No jays. Nothing but the creek and my own boots. And the silence had started to feel like a room with somebody sitting in it. So I talked. I narrated. I said things like, all right, 30 more feet, and there's your corner. And Lord, look at that poplar, out loud, in a low mumbling voice, not to anybody, just to make noise the way you leave a radio on in an empty house. I did that from about 8 in the morning until about 2:30 in the afternoon. At 2:30 from up the ridge, something started doing it back. I want to describe this exactly. Because it is the part I have never been able to say right. It was not words. There was not one word in it that I could recognize. What it was the shape of my talking, the pitch of it, the rhythm. The way a man's voice falls off at the end of a mumbled sentence and picks up again. The little pause where I'd take a breath. All of that perfectly and none of the language. It came from maybe 200 yards above me on the slope, and it was low, and it went on for 4 or 5 seconds, and then it stopped. I stood there with my hand on a sapling and a strip of orange plastic in my fingers, and I felt every hair on my body stand up at once. Then it did it again, and it was closer. And this time there was a second one further, along the ridge, doing the same thing back to the first. And the 2 of them went back and forth across that slope above me in the sound of my own voice for the better part of a minute. I did not run. I want to be honest about that too, because I think people expect running. I couldn't have run, My legs had gone strange, that heavy floating feeling you get on stairs in the dark. What I did was start walking downhill toward the creek at a steady pace, not fast, holding the flagging bag against my chest so it wouldn't rattle. I kept my face pointed forward and my eyes on the ridge on the far side of the water. The talking followed me. It stayed above me on the slope, and it kept pace with me the whole way down, and every so often it would stop. And the stopping was worse than the sound. Right before I got to the creek, I looked up. There was a person standing about 150 feet up the hill, in behind a big double-trunk chestnut oak, with one hand on the tree. That's all. Just standing, with a hand on the tree the way you'd stand watching a car come up your driveway. I could see a shape and a paleness and the dark of hair, and I could see the hand. I have never in my life wanted so badly to look away from something and been so completely unable to do it. We were there like that for maybe 3 seconds. Then it moved back behind the tree, not fast, not hiding. Just stepping out of the way. And I got in the water and walked the creek, the whole 2.5 miles back to my truck, in the cold, because the water was the only place I could see far in both directions. I finished that tract in 3 days that should have taken 7. I hung line like a man on fire, straight through daylight, no lunch, and I never went back up into the northern corner at all. When I gave Dale my final map, I told him the terrain up there was too broke to run a line safe by myself, which was a lie, and he looked at that map for a while, and then he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket and said, that's fine. He didn't ask about the $300 of flagging I'd left in the woods. He didn't ask about the northern corner. He paid me in an envelope in the parking lot of the Dairy Queen in Cumberland, and he shook my hand and he said, "You did good, son." And there was something in his face that I have thought about more than the tracks or the tape or the voices. He wasn't surprised. He was relieved. I asked around some later. Not much, and not directly. Because there's a way of asking a question in that country that gets you a polite answer, and no more. An old man at the feed store in Harlan told me his daddy used to say there were folks back in there who'd never come out for the census. And then he changed the subject to the weather so smooth, I almost didn't notice him doing it. That's the closest I ever got to an explanation. The company cut that tract in 2013. I know because I drove up the improved road they'd punched in and sat at the edge of it, looking at 400 acres of stumps and slash and mud. And I felt something I still can't name. Not relief, not vindication. Closer to grief, honest to God. Like I'd been part of taking something away from somebody and I didn't know who, and there was nobody left to give it back to. I still hang flagging tape for a living, 15 years now, and every single time I come back to a line in the morning and find a ribbon down, I stop and look at the end of it and I check whether it's torn or whether it's cut. I have never once told anybody why. My grandmother's house sat at the head of a hollow about 9 miles outside of Grundy, Virginia, on 90 acres that had come down through her husband's people since before the coal came in. It was a 4-room house with a tin roof and a stone chimney and a back porch that ran the whole width of it. And from that porch you could see maybe 200 feet of pasture before the ground went up hard into timber and stayed timber for as far as anybody was willing to walk. There was no neighbor within 2 miles. The road in was gravel that turned to dirt that turned to 2 ruts with grass down the middle, and in the winter of '96 she was cut off for 11 days and didn't mention it to anybody until spring. She was a small woman. Ida Blevins, born 1931, widowed at 44, and by the time I knew her she was the kind of old that doesn't change year to year. The same gray bun, the same housecoat, the same pair of men's work boots by the door that she wore to feed the chickens and take off in the doorway every time. She was not warm exactly, but she was steady, and she was funny in a dry way that took me until adulthood to appreciate. She raised 3 children in that house and buried one of them, and she never in her life spent a night anywhere else that I know of. And every night of her life, so far as anybody could tell, She set a plate out on the back porch rail. It was a routine so worn in that it didn't look like anything. After supper, she'd fix a second plate, usually cornbread, a wedge of it, sometimes with a spoon of beans or a slab of fatback or whatever was left in the skillet, and she'd cover it with a folded dish towel. And she'd carry it out the screen door and set it on the flat of the rail at the north end of the porch, up against the post. Then she'd come back in and latch the door, and that was that. I saw her do it 1,000 times before I was 10 years old, and I never thought about it once. The way you don't think about your father's cough or the sound of a particular clock. I asked her about it exactly one time. I was 9. I said, "Mama, is that for a dog?" She was at the sink with her back to me, and she didn't turn around. She said something like that, and then she said, "Don't you go moving it?" In a voice that was not sharp, but that closed the subject the way a lid closes on a jar, and I never asked again. Not at 9, not at 12, not at 15. That's the thing about growing up in that country that outsiders don't understand. There are subjects, and you learn the feel of one the way you learn the feel of a hot stove, without anybody having to explain the physics of it. The summer I turned 19, I went to stay with her. My folks had split and my mother had gone to Roanoke, and I had a year of community college behind me and no particular plan. I and my grandmother needed the porch roof redone and somebody to run to town for feed. So I moved into the front room and slept on the daybed and spent June and half of July doing whatever needed doing. It was a good summer. I want to say that plain. We got along. She'd sit out front in the evening and I'd sit on the steps, and she'd tell me about people who'd been dead 50 years like they'd just been by. And I'd listen to whippoorwills start up in the tree line and think that maybe I'd stay. But I was 19. And 19 is the exact age at which a person decides that the things his family does are quaint. And that he is the first one clear-eyed enough to see it. I'd started noticing the plate again. Noticing how much food went out on it. This was a woman who saved bacon grease in a can and reused tea bags. And every single night she put out good cornbread and let it sit in the weather for a raccoon. I'd started noticing that she never once forgot, not when she had the flu in July. Not when we didn't get back from Grundy until after dark. I asked her about it again, gentle, joking, and she gave me almost the same words she'd given a 9-year-old. It's just something I do. And then a beat later, without looking up from her sewing, "It's not hurting you any." That last part is what did it. I heard something defensive in it, and being 19, I heard defensiveness as proof that I was right. I decided she was superstitious. I decided some old fear had gotten hold of her decades back. A hard winter, a bad dream, my grandfather dying, and that she'd been feeding it ever since out of habit. And that the kindest thing anybody could do for her would be to let one night go by and show her that nothing happened. So on a Tuesday night in the middle of July, after she'd gone to bed, I went out on the porch in my bare feet, and I picked up that plate and I brought it back inside, and I set it on the kitchen counter with the dish towel still folded over top of it. I remember exactly how I felt. I felt clever. I stood in her kitchen in the dark, grinning at a plate of cornbread like I'd put one over on the whole world. And then I went and lay down on the daybed in the front room and went to sleep with the windows open because it was July in Virginia, and there was no air conditioning in that house and never had been. The thing that woke me was the porch. I want to be careful here because this is the part that people always want to be footsteps, and it wasn't. Footsteps would have been better. Footsteps are a thing going somewhere. What I heard was the boards taking weight out at the north end where the plate went. One long, slow pop, and then a settle, and then another pop, as the weight came off that board and onto the next one. Then nothing for maybe half a minute. Then a shift. It was the sound a person makes when they're standing somewhere, not doing anything. Just standing. And after a while they get tired of one foot and go over to the other. It was the sound of somebody waiting. I lay there in the dark with my eyes open and I did not move. I had that whole body stillness that comes over you before you have consciously decided anything, before you're even scared. When the animal part of you takes the wheel and locks every joint. The clock in the kitchen was going. Out past the window, the crickets were going. And on the porch, 10 feet from my head, something was standing at the north end of the rail where a plate should have been and wasn't. It stood there a long time. I would guess 3 or 4 minutes, but I have no faith in that number. Then the board started popping in sequence, slow, coming down the length of the porch toward the screen door, and I have never in my life heard anything take so long to cross 15 feet, and then the door handle. It was one of those old aluminum screen door handles with the thumb latch on top, and whatever was out there took hold of it and worked it, up and down, gentle, not rattling, not yanking, testing. The careful way you'd try a door you didn't want to wake anybody by opening. The little spring in the latch made a soft tick each time. It did that maybe 8 or 10 times, paused, and did it again. Then it let go of the handle and put a hand flat on the door frame. I heard the wood take the pressure and pushed, slow, to see if the latch hook would give. The hook held. My grandmother latched that door every night of her life, and I had never once wondered why. Out there, where the nearest human being was 2 miles down a road, nobody drove. That went on close to 20 minutes. I know because I could see the kitchen clock's face through the doorway from where I lay, and I watched the minute hand the entire time. I did not blink much, and I did not breathe right, and my hands had gone numb from holding the sheet. Then it came around the outside of the house. I heard it come off the porch, a heavier sound. Weight going down onto the packed dirt at the side, and then I heard it moving along the wall, and it stopped at the window over the daybed. That window was open. There was nothing between me and the outside but a rusted screen and the 18 inches of air between my face and the sill. Something put a hand against the screen. Flat. I heard the mesh give and creak against the frame. And I could smell it. And God help me, that's the detail I've never been able to get shut of, because it didn't smell like an animal. It smelled like a person. Like a person who has been sleeping in the same clothes in the woods for a very long time. Sour and smoked and human, and it was breathing. Fast and shallow, and high in the chest. Not the breathing of something creeping around trying to be quiet, but the breathing of something worked up. Excited, happy almost. That's the word my mind picked, and I have never been able to make it pick a different one. It stayed at that window for I don't know how long. Then the hand came off the screen, and I heard it move on around toward the back again. And the porch boards popped one last time, and then there was nothing but crickets. And the crickets went on like nothing at all had happened, and I lay there without moving until the window over my head turned gray. My grandmother got up at 5 like she always did. I heard the springs of her bed, and I heard her boots, and I heard her in the kitchen, and after a minute I heard her stop. She'd found the plate on the counter. I lay there with my eyes shut and my heart going like a bird's, and I waited for her to come in and ask me what I'd done, and she did not. She didn't say one word to me about it that morning or ever. What she did was scrape that cornbread into the slop bucket and make a fresh pan. And when it came out of the oven, she cut a wedge and covered it with the dish towel and carried it out and set it on the rail at the north end of the porch. At 6 in the morning, in broad daylight, which she had never done in her life. Then she came back in and latched the screen door and stood there a second with her hand still on the latch. And then she started the coffee. By noon, the plate was empty. Wiped clean, and stacked square at the edge of the rail with the dish towel folded on top of it. Folded. Not dropped, not blown. Folded in half the same way she folded it. I put that plate out every single night for the rest of that summer. And every morning it was empty and stacked, and I never once looked out the window after dark to see who took it. She died in 2009. She was in the hospital in Grundy 9 days before it happened. And the whole time she was in there, she was worried about the house. She'd wake up and ask if somebody was seeing the things. And everybody told her yes, don't worry, the house is fine. I was the only one who understood what she was asking, and I was living in North Carolina by then with a wife and a job I couldn't leave, and I told her yes too. I told her it was being seen to. I don't know if she believed me. I hope she did. Nobody in the family wanted the place. It sat empty for 3 years, and then my uncle sold the timber rights, and eventually the whole 90 acres to a man from out of state. I have never gone back to see what he did with it. But I think about that porch rail. I think about somebody standing at the north end of it on the first night after she died, and the night after that, and the night after that. I think about how long it would take before a thing stopped coming. And the worst of it, the part that gets me at 2 in the morning when I'm 51 years old and 300 miles from that hollow, isn't the breathing at the window or the hand on the screen. It's the arithmetic. She was 78 when she died, and she'd been doing it since before my mother was born. 50 years, 60 maybe, 1 plate a night. Every night, without ever telling a living soul why, whatever was out there in those woods, she didn't start feeding it because she was afraid of it. She started feeding it because it was hungry, and she knew what it was. There were 4 of us on that lease. Me, my brother-in-law Denny, a fellow named Ray Coyle, who worked with Denny at the Chevrolet place in Beckley, and Ray's cousin Mitchell, who was 22 and along mostly because he had a 4-wheeler. We'd been hunting together 6 or 7 years by then, always the same way, public ground, mostly a lot of walking, a lot of complaining. So when Ray came to us in the spring of 2008 with a lease he'd found through a man he knew, 600 acres of private timber up in Nicholas County for $1,100 a year, split 4 ways. We said yes before we'd ever laid eyes on it. The road in was the first thing that should have told us something. It was an old logging road off a state route, and it was passable for about 2.5 miles in a truck if you didn't mind your mirrors. And then there was a slide where the whole downhill side of the road had gone into the creek sometime years before, and past that you walked. A mile near enough, uphill, carrying everything. We hauled in a wall tent and a wood stove and lumber for 2 stands over 3 weekends that summer. And by August we had what we called a camp. The tent on a plank platform and a bench of flat ground, a fire ring, a pole between 2 trees to hang deer from, and a blue igloo cooler we kept a padlock strap on because of bears. The country up there was old. I don't know how else to put it. It had been logged before. You could see the grade cuts and the rotted out sled trails, but it had been a long time, 60, 80 years, and it had come back thick. There were rhododendron thickets in the draws that you physically could not walk through. You crawled or you went around, and going around might cost you an hour. There were rock shelters along the upper ledges, big overhangs where the sandstone had weathered back, some of them 50 feet deep and dry as a room. Mitchell found a rusted out bucket in one of them, and a place where somebody had built fires against the back wall until the rock was black, and we all agreed that was neat, and didn't think another thing about it. We ran 6 trail cameras. This is nothing unusual. Everybody does it, and in 2008 the cameras had gotten cheap enough that we each bought 1 or 2 and slapped them on trees at pinch points and food sources and along the creek. Cutbacks mostly. Infrared 3 megapixel ran off D batteries, wrote to SD cards you'd swap out and take home and look at on your laptop with a beer. That's the whole pleasure of it. You get 140 pictures of the same doe and 11 of a raccoon's face, 2 inches from the lens and 1, maybe, of a buck worth talking about. And you show that one around all week. Camor 4 was the far one. It sat on a saddle up near the northern property line where 2 ridges came together, about 1.25 miles from camp, in a stand of white oak that was dropping heavy that year. Ray hung it in September. It was strapped to a big oak facing a game trail that came up out of the hollow, and it had the best sign of any place on the lease. Scrapes, rubs, tracks like a cattle path. We checked it maybe every 10 days. Now here's the part that matters for the timeline. In the middle of October, we came up for a weekend and found the camp turned over. Not destroyed, turned over. The cooler was gone. The strap had been cut, and I mean cut. Though we didn't dwell on that at the time because Ray said a bear could pop that strap easy and one of us must have left it loose. There was a burn scar on the ground about 4 feet outside our fire ring where somebody had built a fire that wasn't ours. Mitchell said it was probably us from the last trip. It wasn't. And the tent was open. The zipper run up all the way, both doors, and nothing inside disturbed except that the sleeping bags had been unrolled and laid out flat, side by side, like somebody had made up 4 beds. We told ourselves bear. Then somebody said hikers, and Denny said something about the neighbors' kids even though there were no neighbors, and Ray said trespassers. And we hunted that weekend and joked about it and reset the strap on nothing because the cooler was gone. That was the 18th of October. We pulled the cards on the first weekend of November. 5 of them were normal. Deer, deer, turkeys, a bear at camera 2 rubbing its back on the tree, so hard the pictures were all blurred. A bobcat that Denny was thrilled about, amateur. 4 had 411 photos on it. And every last one of them was from the night of October 24th. Between 1:40 in the morning and 4:15, I want to describe how you look at 400 pictures. You don't look at them one at a time. You arrow through them fast. Click, 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 because trail cam photos come in bursts, and you're skimming for something worth stopping on. So Denny had the laptop on the tailgate of his truck in my driveway, and he started arrowing, and the first thing any of us said was, battery's going bad, because the frames were all the same tree trunk edge. Same slope of leaf-covered ground, same nothing. Except in the corner of the frame there was a hand. It was at the very left edge, where the tree the camera was strapped to came into view. And it was a hand holding onto that tree at about shoulder height. Fingers curled around the bark. You could see maybe 4 inches of forearm and no more. And it was in every single frame from 140 to somewhere past 20. Over 100 pictures, taken about 30 seconds apart, and in every one of them that hand was in the exact same place. Denny arrowed through them and none of us said anything. Because what's happening in those photographs is that a person is standing beside that tree, out of frame, holding on to it, for 40 minutes, without moving, not looking at the camera, not touching the camera. Standing next to it in the dark, resting one hand on the trunk, doing absolutely nothing at all. I have been asked 100 times over the years why that's the worst part, and I've never gotten it said right. The best I can do is this. Everything a person does out in the woods at night, you can think of a reason for. Somebody messing with your camera is a thief. Somebody running is scared. Somebody hollering is lost. But a person who stands still in the dark for 40 minutes with his hand on a tree is doing something you cannot fit a reason to, and your mind goes looking for one, and it doesn't find one, and it keeps going. At 2:23 the frame changed. It's a wide shot, the whole trail visible, and there are 3 people standing on it maybe 15 feet from the lens. They are facing the camera. In the next frame there are 4. 2 frames later there are 5, and one of the 5 is small, child size, shorter than the others by half, standing at the hip of the one on the left. They stood there for the better part of 2 hours. Every 30 seconds, another picture, and the arrangement barely changes. They shift. Somebody's head turns. Somebody in the back moves and is gone for 6 frames and comes back. But mostly they stand in a loose half circle around that camera looking directly into it, and the infrared flash makes their eyes into flat white coins with no pupil in them. Which is a thing infrared does to any animal, and which I understood perfectly well, and which did not help me one bit. Ray was the one who said, "Quiet, they ain't got no clothes on." But that wasn't right either. And it took us a long time to work out what we were looking at. They had things on. Wrapped things, tied things. What I'd swear was canvas or tarp on one of them. And something on another that had the shape of a jacket, if a jacket had been taken apart and put back together wrong. One had something over the shoulders that I'm nearly sure was a hide. It was clothing the way a bird's nest is a house. Made, but not made by anybody who'd ever seen the inside of a store. Their hair was long, all of them. The bodies were thin in a way that made the joints look big. And there was one of them at the back who never once faced the camera in 2 hours, who stood turned away with its head down, and every time it came up in the frames, I felt something go cold in the back of my neck. At 3:41, there's a photo where the one on the right is holding our cooler, Blue Igloo, 48 quart, with the crack in the lid where Mitchell had stood on it in 2006. Holding it by the handle at his side like a man carrying a lunchbox. We stopped arrowing. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Denny went through the last of them fast, and around 4:10 the frames start filling up. Something moving in, close, blurred, too near the lens for the flash, and then the very last photograph, 4:15 a.m., is a mouth. That's all it is. Somebody put their face directly against the housing of that camera, and the picture is the bottom half of a face at 4 inches. The lips parted, the teeth, the chin, one nostril at the top edge. The teeth were bad. Worn down, flat and dark at the gum line, but not rotted out. They were the teeth of somebody who'd been chewing hard things their whole life. And then the card ends, because after that, the camera was moved or covered, or turned to face the ground, and there are no more pictures. We drove up the next morning, all 4 of us in daylight, and 2 of us had pistols on our belts. Camera 4 was gone off the tree, strap and all. There was nothing at the saddle at all, except that the leaves had been kicked around some. At camp, the tent was still standing, and the wood stove was still in it, and it was all exactly the way we'd left it. Which somehow made me feel worse than if it had been burned to the ground. We took what we could carry in one trip. We left the stands, we left the stove, we left about $600 of lumber up on those 2 ridges. And we walked out that mile of logging road in the middle of the afternoon in November. And none of us looked back, and none of us talked. And Ray called the man he'd leased from that evening and told him we were done. That man never asked why. That's a thing I think about. The state police weren't interested. I don't entirely blame them. A man walks into a detachment with a memory card full of dark photographs of people standing in the woods. And what exactly is the crime? Denny left it with a game warden for a while and got it back with a shrug and a comment about pot growers, which we considered. We considered every explanation there is. Growers, meth cooks, some family of squatters living out of a rock shelter, some kind of church group, kids. We considered all of it 100 times. Sitting in Denny's garage, and every single explanation runs aground on the same rock. Which is that whatever they were not surprised by a trail camera, and they were not afraid of it. They came and looked at it. They brought the child to look at it. Denny kept that SD card in his console for 11 years. He'd pull it out at bars and hand it to people with a phone and a card reader and watch their faces. I'd say 90% of them said it was staged, and the other 10% laughed too loud and changed the subject. He died in 2019, heart, and my sister asked me if I wanted anything out of the truck before she sold it. I took a set of jumper cables and a thermos, and I left the card in the console, and I have not one day since then stopped wishing I'd taken it, because I'd like to look at those first 100 photos again. Not the mouth, not the circle, not the child, just the hand. I'd like to look at it and see something in it I missed. A rope, a rifle sling, a reason. Something that makes it a man doing a thing instead of what I know it was. Which is a person standing beside a camera in the black dark, 400 feet above a hollow with no road in it, holding onto a tree with one hand, waiting on the rest of them to come.